Oh hi, welcome to another edition of Handlaid Tracks and 3D Printed Trains with Socrates. Today we're taking a look at how to turn a number 4 turnout back to parallel. I started building my Timesaver and I'm using number 4 turnouts and number 6 turnouts, and I needed to go back from the turnout to parallel. Now most people use Flextracks for this, but I'm not using any Flextrack, so I had to design my own return to parallel. It turns out the number 4 turnout is a 4:1 ratio, hence the number 4, and this works out to a 14-degree angle between the diverging track and the straight track. So I needed to design a curved piece of track that curved 14 degrees. I used my 10-inch radius curve and ended up making a pretty good piece of return to parallel. So after the number 4 turnout, if you want to go back to parallel, simply add one of these between that and the straight, and there you go. So this is the return to straight from the number 4 turnout. I made this little jig. The idea was that you could cut the overlap into it, and unfortunately I didn't really use it properly. I ended up having to cut the overlap off after the fact because I should have lined up both ends with the cut, and I just was being careful, so I left it a bit long just to make sure, and yeah, in the end I had to cut it off. But it has a 10-inch curve in the middle of it. I tried to bend it by hand, but it really didn't work very well. And since I have a rail roller, I got out the rail roller, and real quickly that worked much better. I marked both the beginning and the end of the curve and the middle of it, and put it on the rail roller, and pretty quickly had a nice piece of curved track. I've already got some pre-cut ties from the previous video when I made a bunch of cut ties on my tie cutter, and now I have a tie gapper, also even nicer. All you have to do is do a real quick bit of sanding on the top or filing to make sure the top's nice and shiny. Put them in the jig, make sure they're lined up on the one edge, put the rails in on top of it, and then add a couple of clamps. And when you have a clamp on each side and maybe one in the middle there, I can use the 3-point Fast Track's gauge checker to put a little pressure on the rails. And if you've seen the other videos, this is pretty much straightforward now. Hit it with the soldering iron. I primarily do the outsides. Some of these I still think I might have been doing insides. But try not to hit the jig because this is a plastic 3D printed jig. I don't have them in aluminum yet. Still working on my CNC machine. But this works really quite well. You can see when I press down, it sort of pushes the whole jig down a bit as well. But once it's flat against the table, it ends up being in the same place, and I find that as they come out of the jig, they're pretty much flat. The problem is it's sometimes tough to get them out, and at this point also one of the pieces didn't feel like the gauge was completely smooth through it, so just go ahead and heat it again with the soldering iron and push the rail into proper position. I tapped it at least once here and had to cut it out, and eventually I realized, leverage is more effective. And by putting a screwdriver underneath it, I popped it right out. So technique is something you develop with practice. There I am cutting off the long end and a little tiny file to it, and then you have a nice piece of turnout to parallel for the number 4 turnout, and glue it to a piece of 3D printed train bed, and you are done. And this is again the first one of these I made, so I had the bed a bit long and I cut them off. And once you hit it with a little Pliabond, it works very well. I decided to put on the ends, even though they're only going to be soldered to the one side at this point because the other side is the half gap. Again, just trying to figure out the methodology for what I'm trying to do. But at that point, it was time to get out the Pliabond, which is a 2-sided adhesive. You put it on both sides, let it dry, and then as soon as you stick it together, it's permanently bonded. And then you have a nice piece of track that comes off of a number 4 turnout and takes you back to parallel so you can make yards or whatever it is you're trying to make. So it's a small thing, but if you don't have it, what are you going to do? I'm not making out of Flextrack, so I needed to build my own jig and create a whole piece of tie bed and etc. just for such a small thing. But in the end, it'll be useful. And this is the last major component that I had to put together to build the majority of the Timesaver. And it's coming together quickly. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, etc. And I will see you again pretty darn soon. Thanks for watching.